I do not worry so much about the Christian who feels conflicted in our politics. I worry about the Christian who feels no tension at all.
I'm here with Michael Ware, who's an author of this book, The Spirit of Our Politics. So timely. So timely, this book.
Thanks.
Did you know this was going to, I mean, you made this to come out before the election. That's part of it.
My publisher had in
Yes.
their great wisdom.
What a great idea, Michael.
Zondervan.
Zondervan.
Yeah.
Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life. Michael's the president and founder of the Center for Christianity and Public Life. You've worked in the White House with presidents. That's amazing. Like, what was it like to walk into the White House in an official capacity for the first time? Do you remember when you did that?
No, sure. I mean, it's like working in a living museum, though not as exotic as people would think. Like the actual working space of the White House, obviously, like Oval Office accepted, but like where staff work, kind of narrow, cramped, basically like a moist basement. And so you know, it's really like an interesting contrast between like the work that you're doing and like the conditions under which that work is taking place.
You have totally demythologized the White House for me.
Wow. Mission accomplished. I think
I was outside of it recently. It seemed like this austere, impenetrable structure.
Yeah. Well, actually it was like when the White House was being built, it was one of like the big debates about, you know, there were these contrasting views that they wanted the White House to not be an imposing, austere, because they wanted to emphasize the U.S. Capitol. They wanted to emphasize the people, democracy, that we weren't a monarch, et cetera. But then there were some people who thought the White House wasn't befitting the visions they had for a grand nation. And like, it's fun seeing, you know, now because of security issues and just like, you know, just like the urban sort of developments, industrialization, all that stuff. Yeah, but you look at like old photos of the White House and it's just like no gates, nothing.
Out
like
in a field.
Walk out in a field. There's like a, you know, like a dirt road leading up to it. And And so yeah, but it was an incredible honor. Yeah.
I wonder though, do you think today we're wrapped up in this election season? There's this obsession. Who's going to be the president? Do you think as people, we've just put too much emphasis on the president of the United States, like politically or even spiritually as Christians?
I think we've put too much emphasis on the limited influence we have on choosing the president. So, you know, the president's in a really important decision. I think the moral weight we've placed on the vote itself is misshapen, ill-fitting, and really like destructive socially and spiritually.
Wow.
We treat the vote as if it's this grand, ultimate, pure expression of our will, when the vote is probably the least expressive political action you could take.
Really?
So much can go into your thinking about your vote. You know, we all have our like algorithms of like, what are all the issues we consider, all the things we add up. But like what comes out at the other side of that is candidate A, candidate B. And, you know, there's all this industry and, you know, I've worked in politics. So you try and assess what voters are trying to tell you, but you don't really know. You know, like no one really knows. Like it's all, and so, you know, it is, your vote is contingent, it's mediated, and it's a not just a blunt instrument, but in the scale of like a really, its effectiveness is really limited, right? You know, like you're not choosing the president. You are one of, and yet, I just don't even know if I could vote in this election. I don't know if I want to be implicated in that. It's like, you and 160 million other Americans, let's really right size this, the influence that we have and what the vote is. One of the interesting, right, like all of the people who are involved in Get Out the vote campaigns and people involved in civic philanthropy, these are the people, like the only people in the country who are comfortable with our political system as it is. They feel great about voting. They wake up on election day. I can't wait to get to the polls to vote and be an American. Most people don't feel this, but all of the language we have is like, stand up for your voice, make your voice heard. And then people get into the voting box and they go, I was told my voice would be here. Where is it?
Where is my voice? I am alone.
Yeah. And so I actually think we would increase voter turnout by lowering the moral stakes of voting. But the impulse of most of those who are in Get Out the Vote campaigns is no, we need to heighten the moral weight of voting.
I see.
But I think a lot of people don't vote because they say, well, if this vote is supposed to be this ultimate expression of my will, I don't know how to do that. It's like overload. It's like, well, none of the options represent the ultimate expression of my will. But instead, the vote is just a limited stewardship of the influence you have towards the good of your neighbors. Yeah. And if we just viewed it in that way, I think we'd have a much healthier approach.
Over the last 10 years, though, we've become aware of something that I think maybe you could comment. Do you think this contributes to the problem you're talking about? We've become aware, particularly over social media, though I guess this has probably always existed in human biology and evolution, of this thing called negativity bias. When you see something inflammatory, huge, the stakes could never be higher.
Yeah, right.
Dun, 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 and this, we're very attracted to that. We're very attracted to danger.
Yeah.
Very attracted to things going wrong. If I'm a professor and I teach a class and they evaluate me and 58 students are like, this was the greatest experience of my life. And 2 people are like, what's wrong with you, you horrible loser? I'll think about those 2 people for the rest of my life. Yeah. And we see that. The election is full of this stuff. Like what kind of, do you think that there's just an instrumental technical effect that has on the way we think about all of this election stuff?
Absolutely. I do think the short-term utility of it is there. I think we aren't doing enough. There isn't the incentive structure to be able to think in the medium and long term about like what that looks like over time. I think in many ways we're in the middle of experiencing what that looks like over time, which is that people's senses actually get dulled to this constant red alert. They get dulled to this idea that whoever the party's opponent is the worst ever, and now, right, the problem is like you might actually be in a moment where that's where there's legitimacy there. But if you've been claiming that for every election for the last 40 years, right, people's senses get dulled to that. So I do think there's that element. I also it's not just that when we approach politics as a source of entertainment that we're misusing energy or attention. It's that we actually have like limited attention, like our politics has limited capacity. So when you go to politics as a form of entertainment or seeking emotional satisfaction from our politics, it actually reduces the capacity our politics has to be other-centered. It reduces the capacity our politics has to be about advancing justice and affirming human dignity. And so it's not just like there's not just like a missed opportunity. You're actually taking up attention and misdirecting our politics and our politicians when we approach it in that way.
Yeah, I've heard in your speaking and read in your book that you have this idea that politics is something of like an expression. Our own politics is an expression of what's inside of us.
Yes.
Or our politics could even be an expression of our nation's soul, in a sense. If that's true, spiritually even, how would you characterize our nation's soul right now based on what you see in our politics? What's the state of that soul, the state of the union of the soul of America, according to Michael Ware?
I think our politics is sick. One of the frameworks that I use to define that sickness is a framework that some social scientists advance for thinking about the particular kind of polarization we have today. They called it political sectarianism. Political sectarianism is a toxic cocktail of three primary ingredients. First is the tendency of aversion, which is the tendency to dislike and distrust opposing partisans. The tendency of othering, which is a tendency to place outside of the bounds of human community, typical human community, those that you disagree with politically. And then finally, interestingly, is the tendency of moralization, which these academics said is the tendency to view opposing partisans as not merely wrong, but iniquitous. They use the term iniquitous, which I thought was really
theological language. Iniquity.
Really interesting. To raise political disagreement to the level of pure good and evil, to dogma. And they said this is developed in such a way that out-party hate has become a more powerful indicator of voting behavior, driver of voting behavior, than in-party love.
Wow.
In other words, we often talk about the problem in our politics as, if only we could, people are too self-interested. If only we could move from self-interest to conceptions of the common good.
Right.
And I think that's important. I think what I came to terms with researching this book and experiencing and being a participant in our public life is, in some ways, self-interest would be a higher aspiration than where we are now, which is that out-party hate has become such a driving force that we'll hurt ourselves before helping those that we view to be opposing partisans. That's a really sick place to be. Like just think of that in your own social context, that in your own relationships, that you would go out of your way to deny yourself a good, not for the good of others, but for their ill. That's a really sick place to be. And I think, I think that is one way of describing our political culture today.
I think a lot of people would agree with you and say, yeah, it is sick, and we will get well if my candidate wins.
That's right. Yeah. No, right.
Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't. T.S. Eliot has this. He says that the folly of the human endeavor has been to seek to find a system so perfect that people no longer have to be good. And I think this is the primary conceit of our politics, that if we just got the right candidate in, if we just, all we need to do is do campaign finance reform. And if we had the right campaign finance reform, then the incentive structure would be such that it would resist our impulses. I believe in structures. I believe in systems. I believe in policies. I do believe that we could change things in ways that would be more conducive to healthier civic formation. All that stuff is true. What I've come to terms with, though, is that the state of our politics is, in the end, a state of the reflection of our souls. That one of the reasons that we don't have campaign finance reform is that we are not the kind of people who would actually desire the kind of reform that we intellectually say we would want. So the classic example of this is if you ask the American people in a survey, what how would you like to see our politics improve? What do you not like? The American people in a survey would say, these negative ads, this politics of character assassination. Can't we just talk about, I want to hear about positive kitchen table issues that affect me and my family.
Let's lower the temperature.
Yeah, but those ad makers, they just love dividing us. Talk to the ad makers and they'll say, look, put two ads in front of the median American voter.
Right. I see where this is going.
One is positive, here's my plan for housing in America. And the average American voter is snooze button, turn it off.
Right.
Put on an ad where your candidate's opponent has lightning shooting out of their eyeballs and, storm clouds behind them.
Right.
And people eat it up. It makes an impact. Their opinions change. They shift.
Right.
And so intellectually we say, if only we had a healthier political culture. And yet we are the kind of people who, to your point, don't. I mean, this is like pure. This is Romans. This is Paul. This is Romans. We want what we do not want, and we do not want what we would want to want.
Right.
And Willard would say, like, the problem is we need to fix our wanter. But it's so easy, and our political culture is such. And right, there's real risk in, especially politicians saying, like, actually, I could use your help. Like, so what I say about like political courage, we all want political courage, and we have a right to demand it, especially in particular instances. A political courage once is statesmanship. It's standing on conviction. Repeated acts of political courage are unemployment for the politician. So the definition of political courage is acting in a way that incurs a political cost because the people reject your view. Like the definition of political courage is doing something that voters disapprove of. And yet we constantly are demanding political courage from our politicians and saying, like, why don't we have politicians who will display political courage? And it's because we keep on voting them out of office because we might not actually be the kind of people who really desire political courage, except for when it's to our benefit. Right. But that's democracy. Right. So it's, again, the problem in our democracy, at least one of them might be our wanter.
Yeah. I wonder, I hear from a lot of people, maybe even younger people, maybe people at my age. I feel like I've thought this. I confess to thinking this thought that I'm about to attribute to other people right now, which is, it seems almost that we've ratcheted things up to this point and we're so conflicted and we've become such a specific kind of people that maybe only a really severe crisis of some kind could break us of this. And of course, apocalypticism is a theme in Christian theology. It's, maybe sounds dire and dark, and politicians sometimes do draw on apocalyptic themes. If you don't like me, Like, so when I want to ask the question, which I think anyone listening to this would want to ask, which is like, yeah, great. How do we walk this back?
Yeah.
It feels like maybe we can't walk it back. We're not even the kind of people who could walk it back. But rather we're the kind of people who just need some kind of clearing of the deck or some kind of dramatic moment. I don't mean like annihilating all of us. Or I just mean, but I don't know, maybe what would it take? Do you think it would take a crisis essentially for us to fix this?
So there was this German psychologist, Herbert Plug, who was actually a suicidologist. I didn't know that was a career track that you could take. I don't know, like, what I'd do if, someone said, like, oh, I want to be a suicidologist. And, but this was Herbert. And he studied people who had either attempted suicide or had severe depression and had come out on the other side of it. And he was very interested in, like, what does it take? What does it require? And what he discovered is that these are people who had reached the bottom of what he called their secondary hopes or their little hopes. And they had to hit rock bottom. Like they had to reach utter disappointment in those little hopes. And obviously some people just get stuck there. Their little hopes, their secondary hopes, were the furthest out horizon they could see or get to. But he says what helps people, what defines those who got to the other side is they reached the end of their secondary hopes and found what he called a real hope or a primary hope, like a fundamental hope. And I think that's one of the hopes that I have, that we are actually reaching like the end of these secondary hopes, these idolatries, and that clears the way potentially for real hope, for an ultimate hope, for something that can serve as the basis for our lives, but also for public contribution in a way that isn't sinking sand. And so, I you might be You might be right. Although, some would say the crisis is already like we're in it now. Like
This is
the
the crisis.
is here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this book, this is a pretty personalist approach to something that I think increasingly people think of politics as about systems and structures, and I think those are again like very important. But we need to take the responsibility that is ours in our politics. And yes, one person changing their habits, thinking about and taking action, having a vision, committing with intention to following through on that vision and taking up the means to do so. One person doing that will have an effect on our politics, but probably won't change everything. But that person is taking responsibility over what Willard would call the range of their effective will. Dallas Willard, a philosopher from USC, my book is very much an application of his ideas to the public and political realm. They're taking responsibility over that which they have responsibility for, which is really like all we can do. And yet I find our political life is full of people excusing those things that they actually have a say over and saying if only all of these structural things would be fixed, if only we had campaign finance reform, then I wouldn't have to play the game like others play it. But until that happens, until the other party, nominates someone that, I'm at least okay with, then I won't have to lie and cheat and deceive my way into supporting my candidate because the stakes are just so high. Like all of these structural things to obfuscate the rescibility that is actually ours.
That's ethics 101. It's okay for me to do wrong things if you do it.
That's right. That's right. And like and here's the thing, and this is really like the core of my book, which is like, if we can't choose, and if we can't pursue, and if we don't think faithfulness, if we don't think the way of Jesus is viable in our political life, it's so blatantly evident that we don't have control over the outcomes. How much more difficult is it going to be for us to choose faithfulness in the context of, the small business owner who can at least delude themselves into thinking, like, well, if I just put in enough work, and if I'm the one who's making the decisions here, how the business does is is totally up to me, or my relationships, or the way my kids turn out. Like if we can't choose faithfulness in politics, which is so clear, responsibility is diffused, and our vote is only our vote, and our attendance at this town hall meeting is like it's clear we're in a room of like hundreds of people who disagree with us, and if we can't choose faithfulness in that context, if we can't steward the responsibility that is ours in that context in a way that's faithful, in a way that honors God, in a way that recognizes his lordship, how are we doing that in any other area of our life?
Right.
And so very quickly, these political questions, these public questions lead us inward.
Yeah.
This is what Lewis wrote. Very quickly, Lewis has this line, we can say, do as you would be done by until we're blue in the face. But he follows a lot, you cannot love your neighbor until you love God, and you cannot love God. And he says very quickly, these religious questions that we thought we approached as these societal, huge meta structural questions, very quickly were led inward to the spirit, to the will, to like the kind of people we are. Mm-hmm. I'll just mention one other thing that I think is really essential for this, which is I've noted a real crisis of confidence and a sense of a lack of agency among Christians in churches, as if our politics is merely happening to us. Oh. And I think a lot of Christians feel like if they are going to participate in politics, if they're going to be sort of like wise and navigate politics well, it means taking up the language and tools that they see as dominant in our political life. And what this book is seeking to do is place politics, the church's conversation about politics, within and under the life we're living with Jesus, under the framework of formation, and situate politics as part of in the stream of the life of the church in a way that I think can help restore a sense of agency and joyful confidence as we're navigating these things, as opposed to politics being this area of life that is quarantined off from the way of Jesus. As opposed to politics being this area of life in which the way of Jesus does not hold up.
Right.
And any time that we have areas of our life in which we think that, there are going to be real problems.
Yeah, I mean, this is a core spiritual problem for anyone, right?
Yes.
Which is this idea of that I have these hidden corners in my life,
Right.
these areas where I have public ways that I do theology and Jesus things, but then I have these things that are essentially mine.
Yes.
And that are private and that are
Right.
secret. And, this is where all the bad stuff happens
Yes.
in my life. I wonder how you'd react to this dilemma that I see. I've heard it characterized like this. To your point about character and faith, that, and I'll just use conservatives and progressives here as broad labels, like that conservatives don't have a vision for how to lead this very, very diverse nation because their idea of virtue and character is essentially one from 6 generations ago. And they want everyone essentially just to return to the 1920s or 40s or something and live in that mold. And progressives, on the other hand, can't come up with a vision of character or virtue that's uniting enough that everyone should even want to do it, because how are we even defining whose character are we talking about here
Right.
exactly?
Yeah.
People are, as you know, debating these very things.
Yeah.
How do you navigate something like that? Like, where does Jesus come into this and lead us to something different?
Yeah. So the second chapter in this book was, obviously important in my view to include, but I think it's just important for me to assert, I think it's foundational to all of this. And so the second chapter of my book is on what Dallas Willard called the disappearance of moral knowledge. And the essential argument Dallas has here, which is not unrelated to arguments about empiricism or scientism, but Willard's formulation of this is that essentially in the post-World War II era, gatekeepers of knowledge, principally he means academia, but also other decision makers and sort of elites and tastemakers, decided that and acted as if moral knowledge, which is not synonymous with Christian knowledge, but moral knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong, was not publicly available knowledge, did not count as a category of knowledge, and was not fit to be taught by teaching institutions, public institutions. This is a profound problem for a number of reasons. Number one, we live in a moral universe and we're making moral decisions all of the time. And so discounting moral knowledge as a category of knowledge does not remove the need for making moral decisions. It just removes any sense of authority or foundation for making those decisions.
Right.
So I would argue that if you want to have an explanation, at least a partial explanation for the franticness and anxiety, not just in our politics, but in our public life generally, it is driven by this sense that we must make moral decisions, but that we have no authority to do so. And so our public life is full of moral assertions, but has no moral authority. And that's like a recipe for, so like you want to know why we keep on ratcheting up the moral claims in our politics. This is the most important election of our lifetime. Democracy is at stake, all of these things. Now, I'm not, there are other explanations. Like we could talk about January 6th, but generally this ratcheting up of is people feeling like I need to keep on ratcheting up the emotionality of my arguments because that's it is the assertion and the strength of the assertion that counts because there's no knowledge undergirding it. That's a profound problem they have, and it wasn't always the case.
Yeah. So you're saying like we're compensating for a lack of authority.
Yes.
Or a lack of an institution.
A lack of authority. And to be clear, what I'm not saying is, okay, let's find like and authority and go with it. Like what? Like, okay, Bob, you're the one. What I am saying is that we've lost the sense that you can know anything about right and wrong, that you can know anything. So I've been talking a lot about anger, and I think our overestimation of what we can do with anger and what anger does for us in life generally, but especially in politics. That is a subject of moral knowledge. Like Christians bring a lot, and others, but Christians bring a lot of knowledge to bear to that question. But if we view that discussion as just like a self-help category or like a therapeutic category and not as a subject of something that you could really know about. Augustine said, we ought to be very wary of admitting even legitimate anger into our hearts, because once there, it might sour the vessel. Might there be any people in our public life, people that who have admitted even legitimate anger, political anger into their heart that has soured the vessel? That they're now, Willard said, the problem with anger and justifying your own anger is that you might become an angry person. That has profound political implications, and we could know something about like it's not a mystery what anger does to the human person. Right. And yet, if we feel like, well, there's nothing you could really say about anger. Maybe these are things for private conversations. If there's a scripture verse that helps you personally, then more power to you. But no, we need to hold this stuff up for public, not as an act of imposition, but out of a spirit of loving service. Yeah. Look, this is the best knowledge that we have. Let's test it. Willard believed that moral knowledge could be publicly tested. It's not just that it could be publicly taught. It's like actually we don't need favor in sort of public consideration. We're just test it, try it out, try it on for yourself.
Yeah. Friends, these are some deep waters here. And if you like this type of conversation, Michael's book, The Spirit of Our Politics, is for you. Michael, in closing, if you were to give conflicted, angry, confused voters just one piece of advice in closing for how to approach those polls on November 5th this year, what would you say?
I do not worry so much about the Christian who feels conflicted in our politics. I worry about the Christian who feels no tension at all. The crisis for Christians in our politics is not that they're politically homeless, but that they ever thought they could make their home in politics at all. And so politics is an essential forum in which we can love our neighbors. And we will do so imperfectly. We will do so. God is not looming over your shoulder waiting for you to make a mistake, a wrong political judgment that he can condemn you for. And people who think that that's how God is when it comes to our political life often think that's how God is with them generally. He knows your heart. It's not hidden. When I hear Christians talk about voting, so often it's as if they think that they walk into the voting booth, close the curtain behind them, have to do this impossible math equation for this impossible problem, make a decision, open the curtain, leave the voting booth, and Jesus is standing outside there waiting for them. And he wants an explanation. He wants to know what happened in there. Wow. But we don't need to explain to Jesus our political system. He gets it. And so my advice would be, it's not that politics is absent morality. Like there's a responsibility there. But make sure the moral burden that you're placing on your vote, on your political behavior, is appropriate and in the right place, which to me is the orientation of your heart. What are you seeking to do with your vote? That doesn't mean that you'll always make the right political judgment. People can be wrong. They could have bad political ideas and be faithful. Like that's possible. I think it's going to happen a lot. I think it does happen a lot.
Yeah.
And so I would just encourage people to think about the areas of their life that intersect with politics, whether it's running for office or whether it's, Thanksgiving table, and think about how can I steward the limited responsibility that I have in a way that reflects my love for God, and because of my love for God, my love for neighbor. And that will not just, I think, um, mean that we are living ever more integrated lives in pursuit of Christ-likeness. It also means, and I have great confidence, not in political uniformity among Christians, but in spiritual integrity. That if we are seeking to steward our political influence in that way, it will be a tremendous blessing to our public life.
Michael, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for talking with us about this.
It was great. It was great. Thank you.